Good day, everyone. I'm Ellen Anderson. I'm the Climate Program Director at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. We are a nonprofit organization that follows the law and science to protect the environment, and we advocate for equitable zero emissions climate solutions. Just real quick, my background is I'm an attorney. I was a former elected state senator and have worked on clean energy and energy transition for many years. About Minnesota, so I know this audience is international. We're very happy to have you here. Minnesota is in the heartland of the United States, part of the Midwest. Minnesota is home to the ancestral lands of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe people. And the Midwest is a big region of a lot of states. And we've had a lot of success in the Midwest on developing renewable energy. We have a lot of wind and solar and retiring coal plants and building programs for environmental justice. However, we have learned that our region of the Midwest of America, if it was a country, it would be the 6th biggest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. And so we have a lot of work to do in our region. And I think what's important about this is that our success to get to limited emissions to 1.5 degrees and our success to equitable climate solutions is directly tied to the success of the United States, which is also tied to the success of the world. And so that's why we want to share our thoughts today and see how we can find common ground and insights from each other. So I would like to go ahead and introduce our 3 outstanding leading voices from the state of Minnesota who are all joining you here in Glasgow. And I'll introduce them and then we'll hear from them about their ideas. So we're going to start with Laalitha Surapaneni, who's a professor of medicine in Minnesota at the university and a Line 3 activist. We will hear next from Jamez Staples, who is a renewable energy developer, an entrepreneur and small business owner who works in a community in Minneapolis that is a community of color, and he's doing amazing work there he can tell us about. And we'll hear from Laalitha Singh, who is a designer, educator, and change maker. And we'll talk about a number of things relating to your work as well. So we're delighted to have you all here today, and we'll begin our discussion. So first I'll turn it over to Laalitha and ask you to talk to us a little bit about what inspires you as a health professional to work on climate equity and climate solutions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ellen. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. There is so much going on. And, I myself have so much FOMO that I'm missing out on all of these sessions. So I really appreciate you all giving us your time today. As Ellen mentioned, I'm an assistant professor. I'm a practicing hospitalist in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I care for patients who are sick enough to be admitted to the hospital. Since I've been here, many people have asked me, so you're a doctor, what are you doing at a climate conference? And the reason that I'm here is because climate change is a public health issue. When I think of climate change, the first thing that comes to mind is not CO2 emissions or fossil fuels, even though I do think about that. To me, climate change is the asthmatic who's hospitalized due to poor air quality from wildfire smoke. It's the pregnant woman who goes into premature labor because of extreme heat. It's farmers who suffer depression and anxiety because of drought and flood-related loss of crops. Now, climate is not just a public health issue, it's an issue of health equity. You know, I just mentioned extreme heat, but if we think about a scenario of a migrant farmer who's working in, you know, extreme heat, there's probably, they're probably not English speaking. Maybe there's not very strict workplace regulations about when to take breaks during extreme heat. There's no way to cool off during workday, but then imagine they go home and there's no air conditioning at home. So you can't really cool down. And then you have to just go back to work another day to work in the hot sun. And if you have a heat stroke, you don't have health insurance and can't get access to healthcare. So that combination of, you know, multiple risk factors is where the health impacts of climate change start to show, where we see that those are already vulnerable are suffering the worst health impacts of climate change. As health professionals, we are duty bound to prevent what we cannot treat. So in addition to taking care of the patient that's right in front of us, it's time that we step out of our clinics and our hospitals and start working upstream to address the social and environmental determinants of our health. So part of me really wants to just spend all my time discussing various health impacts that, you know, climate change brings about, what's specific to Minnesota. But one thing I've been hearing over and over since I've come to COP is about action. So I wanted to just get down to talking about the specifics of how I've been involved as a, you know, as a physician, as a health professional in some of that upstream work. But I do want to share a resource of health impacts on climate change, which is Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. And they have a report every year. And this year, the US policy brief discusses extreme heat and drought. So most of my time away from the hospital is engaged in physician advocacy. And I wanted to share a couple of examples. I know Ellen mentioned about line 3, but I also wanted to briefly mention the work that I was able to do with Ellen and MCEA. So MCEA was proactively working with scientists to provide you know, evidence to support the work that they do. And in one of those several meetings that I had with Ellen, we started discussing the current law in Minnesota, which is the Next Generation Energy Act, which was passed in 2007. And that sets greenhouse gas emission reduction goals by 30% for 2025. And this was, you know, brought up during our work together, and we were thinking about how not only, you know, are we not meeting the standards that we set back in 2007, but the science has not been updated. So our laws have not been updated to catch up with the science of the IPCC report. So I was very lucky to be part of that discussion and to help draft some of the language of the bill and be part of the bill creation. So, you know, for academics, you know, there's a lot of academics here that I've met, a lot of people working on very specific areas of climate and climate justice. And, you know, one of the ways that we can get involved is to be working with local organizations, you know, environmental lawyers, and help develop policies that are science-based and you know, are able to provide those equitable outcomes that we are all discussing here. Next, I wanted to switch gears a little bit. I think one of the thoughts that Ellen expressed earlier was about, you know, health professionals being involved in the fight against fossil fuels. Now, I don't think I need to talk about the, you know, IPCC Code Red for Humanity. Everyone here knows that we need to stop burning fossil fuels, but the latest production gap report from the UN just last month says that countries are already on track to produce more coal, oil, and gas that'll just blow past our chance for 1.5 centigrade future. no, climate change is a public health crisis. If I have a patient with emphysema, I'm not going to tell them to, oh, it's okay for you to smoke filtered cigarettes. No, I tell them to quit smoking. And it's the same for our climate. And if we want a chance at a 1.5 centigrade future, we should we should be talking past, capturing methane or capturing carbon. We should be talking about no new fossil fuel infrastructure and leaving fossil fuels in the ground. So that was part of my impetus for being involved in the Line 3 work. I learned about Line 3 when I first moved to Minnesota. I went to the chapter meeting of 350.org in Minnesota, and they were discussing about fighting this oil pipeline carrying dirty tar sands oil across the Mississippi River. And, I wanted to share just these slides to show you on the map where the Line 3 is located. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so so the pipeline comes from Canada carrying tar sands oil and goes through Minnesota, headwaters of Mississippi into Wisconsin. And, a lot of us have probably heard about the Keystone XL pipeline. And so Line 3 carries the similar type of oil, which is tar sands oil, and has very similar capacity. And the climate impact of this pipeline is 50 coal plants every single year. So I know Ellen mentioned how much greenhouse gases the state of Minnesota produces. Line 3 is a lot more than our annual greenhouse gas emissions. So again, like talking about those specifics of how, we have engaged as health professionals. So I work with a local health advocacy organization called Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. And so we produced this white paper that talks in detail about the health risks of both construction and operation of Line 3. And as health professionals, we then took that report, and that's the picture you can see on the left. We went to the governor's office and we discussed about all of the health impacts of Line 3. We published letters to the editor, opinion pieces that talked about the climate science and how we cannot afford any new tar sands oil pipelines. And even during COVID, a lot of our medical students were involved in, advocating against the pipeline, talking to the press in social media. And these are some of on the right, you can see some of the pictures where we, as a delegation, we went to the front lines and, we went to one of the construction sites and spoke with the Indigenous leaders who were leading the movement against this very destructive pipeline. And most recently in August, we had a national day of action where health professionals from across the country, several states, went to their local Army Corps office and submitted a letter to President Biden's administration asking him, demanding that we stop Line 3. And here, while I've been here, I've been able to speak with Gina McCarthy, National Climate Advisor, and I've asked her about, how do we talk about climate justice and reconcile building a tar sands oil pipeline through treaty lands, violating treaty rights? How do we talk about the fact that we need to be cutting down emissions and permit this giant pipeline that will be operational for decades, putting out carbon emissions, 50 coal plants worth each year? And I'm still waiting for an answer. Despite all of our efforts, Line 3 has been permitted and oil is flowing. But I think that the valuable lessons that I've learned through being engaged in this fight is that the work really happens at grassroots. And the work happens, and the way that academics can and health professionals can engage in this work is by going to communities and by going to front lines. In academia, I think we have this maybe a culture of like, coming up with a research project and then you go into the community and study the community. But I think it's time we, start talking to frontline communities experiencing the worst climate impacts, figure out where our expertise can fit in, bring in more of our colleagues and help, collaborate, because so much of the Line 3 process has been not just health professionals, but water scientists, geologists, so many different areas of expertise. And, doing that cross-sectoral communications and working together to create policies towards an equitable future. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laalitha. And thank you for those stories and those great examples of how you can make an impact. We really appreciate that. And I'll just note that next week there will be another panel specifically on the Line 3 issue, and there'll be some Indigenous leaders from Minnesota participating in that. So check your calendars for next week. Let's move on and make sure we have time at the end for questions. We have a lot of people on the line. Jamez, let's go next with you. And please tell us about the really innovative, great work you've been doing in Minneapolis.
Well, Ellen, first of all, I want to thank everybody for participating and signing on to listen to us, and the opportunity to even participate here at COP26 that you helped create. The work I do and my team, the CEO of Renewable Energy Partners and Northgate Development. And so our focal point has been making sure that the lower income folks that are most impacted by climate change are actually in the room and participating from an economic perspective. And so what that looks like on the ground is, as a solar developer, we develop projects, right? But as Northgate, the real estate development firm that was formed as a result of our Renewable Energy Partners getting started, when I started the company, we quickly realized that there wasn't, if I want to make sure that people from my neighborhood in North Minneapolis could actually participate in the emerging sector of the clean energy economy, I needed to make sure that they can get training. And so one of the key issues that I found was that training was nowhere near accessible to this area of North Minneapolis. If you wanted to take a class, you had to go to White Bear Lake, which is 2 hours away, one way by transit. If you wanted to get into the line worker work that Excel does, that's a very good paying career. You had to go to Hugo, to Excel's training center. And if you wanted to go to an accredited program at the Minnesota State Institution, you had to go to, you had to go out to Rosemount Dakota Technical College, which is another 2 hours one way by way of transit. So we quickly realized that wasn't a reality for a lot of the people in this community that I live in. And so we decided, hey, look, I decided we need to bring
your voice was just,
to get more,
please.
more what I call it. Can you hear me now?
Thank you, that's better.
Okay, sorry about that. So what we came up with was this EETH model, which is the Engage, Educate, Train, and Hire model. And so, there was a piece of property owned not far from me where I live, 2 blocks on Plymouth Avenue. It was a former workforce center. Previously, before that, it was a roller skating rink, and it was a perfect building. It made enough sense. So we made the acquisition of this property for the purpose of bringing training to the community. Now, being a private guy, a social entrepreneur, obviously, training isn't necessarily in our wheelhouse. However, acknowledging that this property sits on the highest use transit line in the state of Minnesota, we recognize that most people could get to it from this community specifically, but also the fact that there was a $75 million bus rapid transit investment that would allow for other high schools as well as people from the region to have access to this location. So we made the acquisition of the property, and we are in the process of turning that building into a training center, getting young people as well as adults skilled up for the emerging sector of careers and sustainability. So all the things that we're talking about here at COP26, hydrology, water, clean energy, battery storage, those are elements that are actually being deployed on the building. We've got 176 kilowatts of solar on the rooftop. We've got a battery storage system in partnership with the entity that you used to run. back at the University of Minnesota, the Energy Transition Lab, now it's Technology and Environment. And we got an award from the LCCMR to do a partnership with the University of Minnesota on a battery research project. And this is going to be the first virtual power plant in the North American region if we can get it done fast enough. And we're really excited about that because solar is one thing, but battery storage is the next phase. And so in addition to battery storage, we also have an electric vehicle charging station on the parking lot. We also have a heat pump system that will put the gas utility on complete standby. And in addition to that, we're managing all the stormwater on site. So the building itself is a living laboratory of STEM in addition to sustainability careers. And now we were recently awarded an appropriation from the state to help offer some of the programming, to cover some of the programs, because again, we don't offer programming at my company specifically. We're bringing in our nonprofit partners that actually do that work. And so that will help to offset some of the costs of the building operations, in addition to some of the infrastructure improvements. And so what we've done here is we've created the classic way that people always say public-private partnerships, but we're taking it a step further. We're taking it to the level where we are focused on areas of policy that have already been created. The city of Minneapolis has a goal of 100% renewable energy. The county has a goal. The state is pushing for a goal. Met Council has a goal. And our local utility also has a goal, right? So, I mean, to go carbon free. And so my mission has been to make sure that we have equity built in from the bottom up, and making sure that people of Black and brown descent have access to participate in these sectors. Now, it's not necessarily the easiest job because, as you can imagine, buying a building and running a solar company and trying to manage a building, it's been a very, very, very heavy lift. But we're grateful to do it because we know that it's going to have the impact that we need to have. And so for me to be here at COP26 is a big deal. You know, I'm raising this issue about how we are actually on the ground doing this and asking these leaders. I mean, because a lot of them, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of conversations that are really, really productive that are taking place here. However, when I think about it, how are we going to help deliver these programs and opportunity to the people that are on the ground? And so I like to compare it to the Maslow's hierarchy structure. And you got that base of a triangle, and you got those people at the bottom, right, that aren't having their bare necessities met, right? Food, water, clothes, shelter. You know, we can tie that opportunity to the issue of climate change. It's a great opportunity. And the more that we can start to tie that to the educational issues that some people have, specifically in Minnesota being one of the worst places in the country for Black people, as we've seen in terms of the disparities, we want to make sure that we're helping to inform some of the global leaders of the work that we're doing in Minnesota in partnership with our partners, our nonprofit partners at University of Minnesota, MCEA, and others. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we've been doing. But in addition to that, you know, we're developing projects. We are doing, we put a 365 kilowatt solar system on the rooftop of North High School, which will also serve as a STEM, not experiment, but a tool for STEM for youth at the high school to learn from. And so we're going to tie that to some curriculum. Students will be able to go up on the rooftop, take a look at that system, understand how it works. And we were just recently selected by Xcel Energy, our local investor-owned utility, as a partner for their Minneapolis Resilient project. And so what that is we are putting on what I branded the East Plymouth Innovation Corridor just down the street from the training center building. We're also then moving forward with a microgrid project, which we also which Ellen, you also participated in your former career at the what was that organization called, ELAB program. And we were basically, we went out and we proved the model of this microgrid that will go on the rooftop of two public schools and another Minneapolis public schools the nutrition center on the rooftop. And so Xcel selected us as a partner. They'll contribute a $2.5 million 1 megawatt hour battery. We'll put the solar on the rooftop, and it'll also serve as a resilience hub if there was ever power outages, cybersecurity attack, or anything else that could potentially negatively impact the grid and power for the community. So those are a few things that we've been doing, and why I feel like this is a great opportunity to be at COP, because it's important that people understand some of the things that are happening on the ground. I think these high level conversations are great. These billions of dollars and trillions of dollars that are being discussed are great, but we got to figure out how to get those dollars on the ground. And we hope that we can get our congressional partners to get the president supported in the way to to help fund some of those things with the Justice 40 initiative that we've recognized, because then that allows for 40% of those resources, if that bill passes, to actually support low income and BIPOC communities. So thank you and grateful to be here.
Thank you so much, Jamez. That's very inspiring. And boy, you got a lot of irons in the fire. It's occurring to me as just listening to both of you talk, and I can't wait to hear Virajita's talk, that really what we are doing here at the COP as part of civil society, there's several thousand people here who come as part of civil society from around the world. And there's all these, as you said, Jamez, all these really high level targets and goals that are being pledged by many countries and those in charge of countries and companies and others. And it feels like we are here to make sure that those goals happen. And as you said, much of that will have to happen at the ground in communities, in cities, in subnational areas, in states, and we need to hold their feet to the fire. And we can't do that alone, but together we are a powerful group. So thank you for that. So now let me turn it over to Virajita and just get your thoughts about your work that you're doing and how your insights on equitable climate solutions fit into all of this.
Thank you, Ellen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you for everyone who's in the room at the US Climate Action Center and everyone who's joined us online. It's incredibly exciting to be here and absorb everything that's coming at us actually at a very fast pace. So I'm gonna just introduce myself by saying that I work in two roles at the University of Minnesota. One, my I guess core identity is one of a designer. I am a faculty and a researcher in the College of Design. My fields are architecture and sustainable design, and I'm affiliated with the Center for Sustainable Building Research in the College of Design, where my core work there has been to found and lead the design center, a program called Design for Community Resilience that works with Minnesota communities, one community at a time, about 4 or 5 a year, to really use methodologies of design around buildings and landscapes, but partner with the communities to design solutions. So that's one area of my work. The second is I serve as an Associate Vice Provost in the Office for Equity and Diversity. And there my work is based on campus in advancing equity and diversity. And what do we mean by that? It's also equity, diversity, and inclusion. There's 3 areas to that. Are we expanding our representation? So is our representational diversity on campus, so this is across all 5 campuses of the University of Minnesota, increasing? And how is our campus climate? That's the second dimension to it. And by that, we're not talking here about the weather or climate as we talk about in climate change, but is it a welcoming climate for our community? Because you can't just increase representation without actually checking if people can thrive, or are we still in dominant mindsets? And the third is strategic partnerships and initiatives, which is basically saying, are we working together to achieve our goals? So those are the 2 areas of my work, design and equity, and I see them as inseparable. One influences the other. And specifically, when I think about design, I often think about design thinking. And for many of you may be already familiar with that concept. But it can be broken down in one form in these 5 steps. One is you start with empathy for whoever it is that you're designing for. And in this case, I'm thinking about climate change requires us to redesign everything. And that's our systems and processes and outcomes. And so you start with empathy, you define what the problem is, you ideate, which is you generate a lot of ideas, and then you prototype and test. And you do this iteratively, which means that you're constantly creating and testing solutions. And you can kind of hear that in what Laalitha said, as well as what Jamez said. there's a lot of on-the-ground experimentation happening on, and it's all hands-on. The third thing that's really important to me, in addition to equity, diversity, inclusion, and design, is this notion of partnership. So I'm very influenced and work in the area of cultural transformation. And I follow the work of Rian Eisler and others, who have proposed this cultural transformation theory that says that in any structure, whether it's society as a whole, or an organization, even family structure, you can lean on a spectrum that goes all the way from domination to partnership. And we're talking even about from intimate relationships to international relationships. And each society has a combination of these at play. Some societies lean more towards one or the other. And it is really a question about how can we use partnership to really propel our work forward, because what we have seen, and the reason we have equity issues, is that because there has been domination at play, whether it's within subcultures, across communities, within races, and so on. So we're really talking about dismantling all of that if we are to move forward. And that's one of the things that's striking me coming to COP as well, that we are really talking about, and I was speaking to a colleague here from our university team, and saying that, we are in a place where we have to dismantle the plane as we're flying it, even as we build the plane as we fly it. So all of that is happening at a really fast pace and needs to happen even faster. But maybe one of the most important things that I think needs to happen, especially because climate change I see it as a design problem, but a really wicked design problem, that we need to, on one hand, trust in our capacity to innovate, because we are humans, we are creative. When we set our minds to do something, we can do it. Take the example of sending man to the moon. And so on. But at the same time, we have to be honest and have integrity, which is not something we have a track record of doing, especially with climate change. And if you think about the hierarchical structures all the way from government leaders to people on the ground and individual decisions, we know that in our own practices, I suppose, when we make choices, and how they impact climate as well. So there's having integrity and honesty about these. And that's why this, feedback loops of data and outcomes, we can, when we try to fool ourselves that we're making progress, we can use that data to really tell us where we're at. And then this ability to kind of work with the discomfort, because we don't want to look bad. We don't want to seem like we're failing. And yet sometimes we want to slack on the work that needs to be done. So, sort of navigating all the complexity of discomfort is something that is basically we're charged with in trying to solve this problem. And I actually think I lean to the side of optimism, because I really trust that we can do it if we set ourselves to do it. And then coming back to equity, it's no longer possible. And I see this in maybe a little bit at COP, but I certainly see this in the environmental context, that sometimes it feels like one group of people thinks that they can get there without the other, and we can't. We have to all get there together. We can no longer try to move the dial with just one group or the other. And that's the big challenge, which means that we really need to open up, be responsible, get into our discomfort of even across cultures as well as across disciplines. I see that at the university, we're often very siloed. I also think that there is an issue about leadership here. My personal sense, and I may be completely wrong, is that I think our leaders in every institution are more conservative than they need to be. And they are not in sync. And I count myself as a leader at the university too, not always in sync where people are ready to go. And so I think we need to do that now. We need to get there. We need to be ahead of where people are ready to be, and I think, way behind that spot right now. So lots of ideas, but I'll stop there because I'm sure there's lots of questions.
Thank you so much. I love how you put all these topics together and all the different, you really made the case that there's so many different types of approaches and kinds of expertise and ways of building this future climate future that we want right now, that we need to start building right now, and that to really start to articulate what it would look like to design that equitable climate future. I don't even want to say the word future because we don't want it just to be put off in the future. How do we do that? And I really like how you have articulated so much of that. There's so much more I would love to ask you all, but I think I'll start with one bigger question and let you all have a chance to answer quickly. We're gonna, in about 10 minutes, we'll stop with and allow us to look through the questions in chat and try to respond to some of those. So maybe for the three of you, you can just jump in and maybe this can be a little conversational. So what would you, now that you've been at the COP for a short time, really interested in what your impressions are and what you've learned and taken from it. And what would you say would be success from the COP, from your perspective? What do we need to see happen?
I would say we need to see more evidence-based, kind of like how we're going to get to the ground, right? Again, back to the whole discussion about high-level conversations, I think it's imperative that, and I understand that we don't have the time to hear about everything, but when someone asks you a question, you're prompted, you should be able to answer about how you're going to deliver these things, right? And I also think that it's going to require a lot more of these public-private partnerships. And what I don't see a lot here, and that's just maybe because, I've talked to, we're mostly in a lot of just private conversations, but more of the public-private partnerships, I think it's going to be critical to advancing this work. I mean, when the public sector collaborates with the private sector and even philanthropy, I think we'll have a real fighting chance at achieving, because government's not going to be able to cover everything, private sector's not going to be able to cover everything. I think that we can kind of start to close that gap with some partnership with philanthropy. We can get to where we're trying to go.
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of conversation about adaptation that I've been, witness to, and there's definitely a sense of urgency. And this is my first COP, but I think there's definitely like a sense of realism about the pledges that are being made and how they don't match up to the science, like Jamez said. I think I've been most influenced by hearing from island nations and how urgent it is that we take action. Still, I think the most memorable to me are Barbados, Fiji, and I've heard youth activists from Kenya. I think these are the words that kind of like stick with me about how the most vulnerable are already seeing those impacts. And so for me, I would say that science-based pledges of no new fossil fuel infrastructure and making sure we continue to do the work to get to 1.5, because I've heard in many conversations that there's already this sense that, oh, we're never going to get there. We were never going to get there anyway, and so let's aim for 2. And so I think that's the conversation that we need to overcome and continue our work towards the 1.5.
So for me, I think one thing that strikes me is that it's just incredible to see. I mean, I think 25,000 people are expected here, and certainly we've already seen, I think, 10,000 or so. It feels like we've been queues that are that big often here. But what's incredible is that you can see representation of humanity, right? People from lots and lots of different cultures and countries people from lots and lots of different disciplines and professions and so on playing different roles. So it's incredibly exciting. And especially I have to say, coming from Minnesota, it feels very different, right? So that's very powerful. But what I'm seeing is one of the things that strikes me, Indigenous voices, right? Like I'm seeing just incredibly powerful voices speak to it. And it's really revealing that we have a big clash of worldviews in front of us, right? For Indigenous people, the earth is a living thing, living being, and they feel the planetary loss in ways that it's even hard to describe. Meanwhile, for other people, the planet is a resource, and our way of life is under threat in a different kind of way. It's our sort of, our consumptive lifestyle that is a threat. And all of those viewpoints are right here. And I have been asking this question about how do we reconcile those? How do we work through those to advance? The other thing is financial institutions. The good thing we're seeing is financial institutions are now at the table. I heard this, the Nordic region international bank speak, CEO speak, and he was talking about noting the sense of urgency, but also the private sector is buying in. And he committed in that session to his goal was $30 billion in the next, till 2030 committed towards this work. So I think there's this moment, but I also was shocked to hear that financial institutions for the first time have formed, are represented in the workings and the leadership of COP. This COP is the first time. And how did we ever think that we were going to get this done without resources, right? So I think those are kinds of things that are coming up. But I've also encountered work like the work of the Resilience Lab that feels, it's invited science fiction writers and poets and other kinds of voices to like reimagine where we're going, and that's very exciting too.
That's great. I don't see a lot of questions in the chat, and more comments and ideas and suggestions and kudos, which is very nice. So maybe one question here, if you all would want to tackle this, is sort of the intersection between cutting CO2 reduction and species extinction problems, like trying to, I guess the writer says the recent Audubon birdwatching group report experts say 20% of carbon can be captured by preserving and upgrading natural areas, which also helps stop species extinction. So these things are tied together. Any comments or thoughts on this?
We did hear countries committing to reforestation. I think that came out in the last couple of days. So I think there's definitely commitment towards that. I did see an incredible visual yesterday, which showed, I think this was in Brazil, where it showed lands that were owned by or, under indigenous leadership, the green areas and everything else outside of it is devastated. So it really started to bring up issues of not only how do we reforest, but who does that and with what approach.
One of the things I heard on one of the panelists this morning was in relation to how do we start to assign a value to not just livestock, but like our animals, the rest of our wildlife and natural habitats, and saying like like an elephant is worth X amount of dollars, and something to the effect where if a cruise ship were going through the water and it were to kill one of the whales, it would have to pay X amount of dollars. Being able to put some sort of teeth into how we look at the species, right? The species at large. That way because we do value them, but we don't necessarily value them with a monetary value, right? We appreciate the fact that we can go see an elephant, but we don't listen to it. And so it was interesting. It was a very interesting take on the way that we look at things and the way and what we value and how we value it. And I wish I could be as articulate as this gentleman was. I'm probably not doing so well, but it was really interesting, and it just changed everything about how I kind of looked at in that moment when I was really there in the moment about how I thought about natural habitats and whatnot. So yeah, it was a really high level.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Do you have other impressions from being at the COP or other learnings that you've already absorbed in your time here that anyone would like to share or that you'd like to take back to Minnesota?
I can speak to, I think the big challenge before us is how do we work in synergy, right? I mean, how do we partner across our different areas where building, for example, government, private, university and others, and how do we do it consistently and continue to scale up the work? I see that as a big challenge, and maybe you all see it differently. And the other thing is, I mean, I'm thinking about our campus, for example, the university, and we've reduced our emissions by 50% in the last 12 years. And these are direct emissions, but I think the goal is to be net zero, and we've said 2040, and I wondered if that could happen sooner, so things like that. I think, I just think we need to accelerate, and also the other issue that comes up is that how do we build trust while doing this work? I don't think we can make much progress without working in partnership and with trust. And I've heard it said that change happens at the speed of trust, and that's my big question. I see the possibilities, but I want to know how we can do that in Minnesota on the ground.
That's great, thank you. I have some more questions coming in, so let me add them to the conversation. So at COP, I'm wondering about the allocation of resources between adaptation and mitigation. Where do we put those resources? That's a great question.
Yeah, we were in a panel this morning where we heard about resources, the $100 billion failed promise, where we developed countries have not fulfilled their promise of providing that funding, but that we also actually heard a lot about not just the amount being available, but how much of it goes to mitigation, how much of it goes to adaptation. What is the interagency kind of collaboration to not only have the funds available, but also have them very accessible? Because on the ground, it's very diverse, the way that climate impacts are showing up. And so we've heard a lot of talk about how rules are being developed and modified to kind of fit in and cover these larger climate impacts, including pandemics. Yeah, I think I'm gonna pause there. Oh, sorry, I remembered what I was gonna say. But just that the funding needs to be more accessible to a lot of developing nations. I think that was a point that was brought up over and over. And I was also in a panel where Indigenous leaders were speaking from Nepal, and one of the comments that was made was many times input is sought about how to kind of develop projects, but then once community input is given, once Indigenous leaders share their wisdom, there's really not a lot of funding actually available at the local level. There are these kind of bigger pledges, but then when it kind of gets to where the project has to be implemented, there's not a lot of funding available. And so how do we make sure that these big promises are being delivered on the ground?
And to
Yeah,
answer that
that's
question,
great.
Alan,
Go ahead.
I think the question
Go ahead.
you asked, how do we deploy? You said adaptation versus what?
Mitigation.
Mitigation. I think it's a both and. Obviously, I think that mitigation is one thing, but we know that we can't stop everything. I think that we need to look at. I think each individual region needs to think about what the best plan is for them. This is no different than the issue of disparities for me. Like, how do we stop? How do we close the disparity and at the same time provide the pathway to prevent the disparities from happening? It's a 70-30, and then it's fluid, right? It moves. It doesn't necessarily just stay one way, at least so that we can start to clean up what we have of some of the damages that we've done. But it's we have to do both, and it's something that I think that, again, as was referred to earlier, that think about things differently, right? We Raj and I heard earlier that $30 billion, that's a good amount of money, right? And that moves private sector. People move when they hear those kinds of numbers. And when you start to talk about those kinds of numbers, more businesses start to come to the table. The banking industry is here. The banking industry is saying that we need to do something, and that mobilizes people and businesses to start being creative about how we fix these problems, right? And that's where even university, right? I mean, university is a critical role, and all our NGOs, right? They have to start thinking about how we can work with one another to address these issues, opposed to just in our individual silos. We need these throughputs, right? The same thing I said earlier to the three of the leaders that were on a panel was, hey, we got these major issues, and everybody's operating on their own little space. We got to put a throughput to everything, and everybody's got to come along with it, and the way you do that is the incentives. The incentives are different for different entities and different people and how they operate. You got to find out what motivates each entity, what space, and get them hooked in and pull them along.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think, Jamez, what you're saying also is about us getting out of our discomfort of working together, right? I mean, because I think we are often comfortable in our bubbles of whatever sector we belong to, but this problem is so huge that we're not going to be able to solve it without working together. And that means that we're going to have to face and work through that discomfort. And even in the session that Jamez mentioned, we could see that the government and the private sector there was, collaborating in ways that they were kind of reinforcing each other. And the private sector was telling the government representative that we are here for you and we are going to help implement, So I think there's something there about really trying to transcend our own self-interest or what our perceived self-interest, and really try to, sort of understand what we're facing here and what this needs. It really needs us to come together. And I know that just experiencing firsthand the climate change impacts in so many of the global communities is bringing us to that point more, but it just needs to happen faster, and we don't need to wait for more disasters to be able to do that. And so that's going to take, in my view, inner work on an individual level as well as the level of organizations, which I'm not sure we're all ready for yet or doing as best as we can.
Yeah, I think that is a great segue for this other question that is different. I'm trying to find it here. This is a challenging one, and it's really aimed at the United States, but it may have application in many parts of the world. So how can we shift the political climate here in Minnesota, across the nation and the world, to make sure that state, national, global climate goals and equitable climate goals are an accepted challenge across all political parties? We know that's a challenge in the US and in our state. Any thoughts about that? What do we do about it, or what can we learn from others to help us bridge that divide?
I'll just jump in here for a minute to say that I was at a session by Climate Generation, Go Minnesota, yesterday. It was fantastic. And please, if someone else remembers the name of this wonderful African-American elder who spoke at that session. Please put it in the chat or speak it. But she made a powerful statement. She said that businesses can fail, governments can fail, but people won't fail. And so I do have faith that if people speak up and we have our voices and we're at the table, as we are here, we just have observer status. We don't have actual power in the negotiations here, but we are here and it makes a difference. It does make a difference because it reminds people of who they're working for and what we need to do. So I think organizing and really demanding is going to be important. So I'll stop there. Sorry, others may have a.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that, it's building your community. And whether, for me, working on Line 3 over the past like 2.5 years, it's been organizing within the health community, talking to more people about climate change and how that's impacting health, and building that not just local, but just a national network of all of us who are working on this issue, sharing resources, because this is a lot of very hard work. It's emotional. It can be difficult and draining at times when there are setbacks. And so I think just being able to kind of step in and step out and work together as a community, I think has been the most fruitful. And honestly, it's been also like a work plus a talk at the same time. So, being able to have those conversations that are very action-based. So if you're talking to someone, not just like a theoretical, but here's how you can change the system, not conversations that are like, oh, drive less or, carry less plastic bags, but changing the system that's forcing us essentially to make these unsustainable choices. And so personally, I've found that having more and more of those conversations and building our community is how, we're going to make progress.
Well, on that point, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jamez, and then I'll have one more question. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say, I think it's imperative that, we find a way to get, well, basically what was just said, we need to get more people involved. I think that if it goes back to the point that I made about Maslow's hierarchy, we can get more people to understand the significance and the importance of this and show them and tie this to the economic opportunity that's being presented. That base of the triangle, those people that are in the greatest level of need, they become, once they start earning revenue or start to do a little bit better, they start to think differently about things, right? And they start the 2016 election when he acted case of those coal workers, right? He convinced them that he was going to bring coal back, right? And that was just crazy. But they showed up and they voted. And see, when you start to try type things to people's individual opportunities and overall well-being, they see themselves as a partner in the game, right? And I think that it's imperative that we start to, I'm apolitical and, Dems feel one way and Republicans another, but the Republican Party is about business. And if the business is increasing the tax base, then we need to figure out how to make that a discussion so that they see the value proposition in that.
So just to build on your all of your comments, let's go with this last comment that's about our question. It's relevant to Minnesota, but it is applicable to everywhere. Asking how can we build a more resilient and efficient cities and buildings in Minnesota, and this again anywhere, and how can we partner with local organizations like Renewable Energy Partners to ensure people profit from these improvements? So maybe you've already started to answer that, Jamez, but any other thoughts on that?
Sure. I think that, the work that Richard Graves is doing with SB 2030, the building codes and whatnot, is a great way to start. I think that this goes back to the fact that we need to also take into consideration the implications of these new technologies and how much they increase the cost of building, right? when we, and that's not a dig. What that is if it's going to add costs, it needs to also mitigate, right? And that's what Richard's doing. And that's kind of like the build back better bill, right? That's what we're thinking about. How do we build back better than what we previously had? So how do we activate our legislators, our Congress people to actually do this work that's going to support it? Because it's not just going to come from the traditional mechanisms that we've had, right? There's some ways that government can incentivize this work to happen, right? Be it TIF districts, tax incremental financing districts, where these buildings are being built, some sort of rebate on the fact that it is an energy efficient building. I think it's imperative that we get these new technologies and we allow for the private sector to play an active role, right, in helping it happen. Because if we don't, right, we're going to lag in terms of innovation. I mean, we're watching the bullet train. That thing is how old, right? I mean, we still don't have one in the States to take us from the east to the west coast, right? But here we are.
I'm going to have to stop now. Thank you so much. And there's still some really great comments and questions about natural time zones for climate, about how to have hope. Lots of things to talk about as we move on through the next few weeks of the COP. Thank you all so much for your wonderful insights and comments today. And thank you all for participating and providing such great comments and questions. So with that, we appreciate your time and discussion and hope we can carry on some of these themes going forward. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.